In a bustling corporate office, a heated moment unfolds. The CEO, Jonathan Carter, slams a termination letter on the desk, his voice echoing through the room. "Pack your things and leave," he barks. The employees freeze. Gasps ripple through the open workspace. All eyes are on Sarah Collins, a quiet but hardworking woman, now humiliated before her peers. What Jonathan doesn't know is that this decision will come back to haunt him in ways he never imagined. Who is Sarah really? And why will he regret this moment more than any decision he's ever made? Jonathan Carter is the kind of boss who rules with an iron fist. He built Carter Industries from the ground up, turning it into one of the most successful tech firms in the country. His employees fear him more than they respect him. To Jonathan, business is about numbers, not people. "If you don't produce results, you're replaceable," he often says. His company operates in a sleek, glass-covered high-rise in downtown New York, where innovation is the heart of every discussion. But behind the futuristic office design and high-tech workstations, employees work under immense pressure, constantly fearing that one wrong move could be their last. Among them is Sarah Collins, a mid-level analyst who has always kept her head down, doing her work efficiently and quietly. She's known for her problem-solving skills and her meticulous reports that have saved the company thousands of dollars. But unlike the flashy, self-promoting executives, Sarah never sought attention. What most people don't know about her is that she wasn't just an ordinary employee. Behind her simple appearance was a woman with an extraordinary past. Sarah grew up in a well-connected family, but after a personal tragedy, she chose to step away from her privilege and build a career from the ground up. She never used her last name, Collins, as a tool to gain favor. She believed in merit, not nepotism. But on this fateful day, none of that mattered. Jonathan had been under immense stress. The board was pressuring him to cut costs, and he needed to make an example of someone. When a minor error was discovered in a financial report, one Sarah had submitted, he saw the perfect scapegoat. He didn't ask questions. He didn't care to hear her side of the story. In front of dozens of employees, Jonathan called her out. "This kind of incompetence is unacceptable. You're fired." His voice was cold, his decision final. Sarah stood there stunned, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of her desk. The whispers around her grew louder. She had done nothing wrong, and soon Jonathan would regret every word. The room buzzed with tension. Jonathan Carter leaned against his polished mahogany desk, arms crossed, watching Sarah as she stood there, her face pale but composed. The murmurs of her colleagues filled the air, their whispered judgments almost as loud as the harsh words Jonathan had just spoken. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, the sting of humiliation burning her cheeks, but she remained silent. She knew better than to argue in front of the entire office. Her mind raced, each thought a blur. How did this happen? Why had he jumped to conclusions so quickly? She'd made a small error in the report, yes, but nothing that warranted such a public spectacle. She had worked hard for this job, silently and diligently, always ensuring she contributed in ways that mattered. But Jonathan didn't care. He saw her as a lowly analyst, someone who was dispensable in the face of his company's image. The board wanted him to show control, and Sarah had become the perfect target. "Leave. Now!" Jonathan commanded again, his tone colder than ever. Sarah nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Without saying another word, she turned and walked toward the door, each step heavy with the weight of betrayal. Outside the office, the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the stares of her co-workers as she passed, their judgment plain on their faces. Was she really that incompetent? Had she failed them all? As she reached the elevator, she felt the tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. Crying would not help her now. She had to be strong. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat in a nearby cafe, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. She had barely touched the sandwich on her plate, her mind consumed by the events that had transpired just hours earlier. The sudden loss of her job felt like a punch to the gut. What now? She had no idea how to begin picking up the pieces. Her plans for the future, the dreams she'd carefully built in her mind, all seemed to unravel in an instant. But then, as if fate had a hand in it, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. "Sarah?" She looked up, surprised to see Michael Williams, an old acquaintance from her early days at Carter Industries. He was a mid-level manager, someone she had worked alongside during her first year at the company. While they hadn't been close, they had shared a few casual conversations over lunch and coffee breaks. Michael had always been friendly, but Sarah never expected to see him here, not in this moment. "Michael," she replied, forcing a smile. "I heard what happened," he said, sitting down across from her. His expression was filled with sympathy. "I'm sorry, I know you didn't deserve it." Sarah's heart sank. She had known that the news of her firing would spread like wildfire, but hearing it from Michael, someone she had worked alongside, made it all the more real. "Thank you," she whispered, "but it doesn't matter now. I've lost everything." Michael's eyes darkened. "You didn't deserve it. Jonathan, he's been acting strangely lately. It's like he's been pushing everyone to their limits." Sarah furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" "Well," Michael hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "He's been under a lot of pressure lately. The board's been breathing down his neck. But I think it goes beyond that. There's something personal going on with him. He's been different, angrier, more unpredictable." Sarah looked at him, confused. "I don't understand. Why would that have anything to do with me?" Michael leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "I don't think it was just the report. Jonathan has been making decisions like this lately, cutting people loose without a second thought. It's like he's trying to prove something to someone, maybe even to himself." Sarah's mind raced. "But I've always done my job well. I've never caused trouble. Why would he make me his target?" Before she could ask another question, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it quickly and stood up. "I've got to run, but listen, if you need anything, let me know. I'll help however I can." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange sense of gratitude. As he walked out of the cafe, she sat back in her chair, her thoughts swirling. Michael's words echoed in her mind. Something personal going on with Jonathan? What could that mean? Had she truly been just a pawn in a much bigger game? The next few days were a blur. Sarah spent her time sifting through her emails, trying to make sense of what had happened and how she could move forward. But no matter how hard she tried to find answers, the questions only piled up. It wasn't until she received an unexpected phone call that things began to take shape. "Sarah, it's Natalie from the board," a voice on the other end said. "We need to talk." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Natalie was one of the few board members she had ever had direct contact with, and she had always struck Sarah as professional, if not slightly distant. "I'm listening," Sarah replied cautiously. "I've heard what happened, and I want you to know—" "This is not over," Natalie continued, her tone firm but not unfriendly. "Jonathan's decision was rash, and there's something you need to know. There's more at play here than you realize." Sarah's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "There are forces at play in this company, forces that Jonathan isn't entirely in control of. He's been manipulated into making some of these decisions. You need to be careful." Sarah was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Manipulated? By who?" "I can't say much over the phone, but let's just say that Jonathan's past is catching up with him, and you were the first to feel the consequences." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah stunned. Jonathan's past? What did that mean? She had always known him as the confident, successful CEO who had little patience for personal matters. But now she was beginning to see that there was a lot more to him than met the eye. The following week, Sarah returned to Carter Industries, not to reclaim her job, but to confront Jonathan. She had learned enough to understand that there were things going on behind the scenes that had nothing to do with her performance as an employee, and she wasn't going to let Jonathan get away with it. As she entered his office, Jonathan looked up in surprise. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "I'm here to talk," Sarah replied, her voice steady. Jonathan sighed, rubbing his temples. "What's the point? You've been fired. Just go." "I won't go," Sarah said, her eyes locked on his. "You owe me an explanation. You owe me the truth." Jonathan stood up, his expression hardening. "I've already given you the truth. You made a mistake, and I had to make an example of you." "That's not the whole truth, Jonathan," Sarah said, stepping closer. "There's more going on, and you know it." Jonathan paused, his gaze faltering for a moment. For the first time since she had entered the room, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I was forced into this. There are things happening in this company, things I can't control anymore." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. "You don't know who you're dealing with. There are people who want to take everything from me. People who want to destroy this company, and me along with it. And I've made mistakes. I've tried to control everything, but it's too late. Too late to fix anything." Sarah stepped back, processing his words. For the first time, she saw Jonathan not as a cold, calculating CEO, but as a man cornered by forces beyond his control. "I didn't fire you because of the report," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I did it because I was told to. I was manipulated into it." As Jonathan's confession sank in, Sarah realized that this wasn't just a story about office politics. It was about power, manipulation, and the consequences of choices. Jonathan wasn't the villain in this story. He was a victim, just like her. And in that moment, Sarah made a choice. She wasn't going to let him get away with it, but she wasn't going to fight him either. She would fight for something bigger, for the truth. The tension that had been building between Sarah and Jonathan for the past few weeks finally reached a breaking point. The confrontation in his office had left Sarah questioning everything she thought she knew about him. But now, standing face to face with him, she knew one thing for certain. She needed to make him understand the gravity of what he had done. Not just to her, but to the very company he had worked so hard to build. It had been a long week since their last conversation. Sarah had spent every waking moment digging into the company's records, trying to piece together the mystery of what had led Jonathan to make such a drastic decision. Each day, she uncovered more signs of corruption, manipulation, and corporate sabotage, some of it connected to Jonathan's own past. But the deeper she went, the more she realized that the answers she was looking for weren't just about her firing. The truth was much bigger than that. Now Sarah was standing in Jonathan's office once again. The glass walls of his corner suite reflected the dimming light of the late afternoon sun, casting a shadow over the room. Jonathan, standing by the large window, looked like a man who had been stripped of his power. His posture was slumped, and his usual aura of confidence was absent. He was vulnerable now, more so than Sarah had ever seen him. "I didn't want it to come to this," Jonathan said quietly, not turning to face her. Sarah stood still for a moment, taking in his words, but she wasn't here to empathize. She was here to get to the heart of the matter. "I know you didn't," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "But you didn't give me a choice. You fired me without asking for an explanation, without even considering that I might have been set up. That was your mistake." Jonathan finally turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and frustration. "I didn't have a choice, Sarah. Do you think I wanted to fire you? It was never personal." "Then what was it?" she asked, stepping closer to him. "You're telling me that you didn't know what was really going on? That you were just following orders?" Jonathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment there was silence between them. His eyes darted to the floor as if he was wrestling with something deep inside him. Then slowly, he spoke again, his voice cracking with emotion. "You don't understand. I was being controlled," he said, his words barely above a whisper. "They used my weaknesses against me, and when they found out that I was vulnerable, they went after the people I cared about. People like you." Sarah's eyes widened. "Who? Who are you talking about?" Jonathan hesitated, looking as if he wanted to keep the truth buried, but the weight of his guilt was too much to bear. He had been carrying this secret for too long, and now with Sarah standing before him, the need to confess was overpowering. "Do you know who my father is?" Jonathan asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "What does your father have to do with any of this?" "Everything," Jonathan said. "My father is Peter Carter, the man who built this company from the ground up. He's the one who made sure I inherited it, but he also has his hands in so many other businesses, shady businesses. I didn't have a choice in how I got here, Sarah. It wasn't just my talent that put me in this seat. It was his influence." The revelation hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. The Jonathan she had worked with, the man she had always believed to be a self-made success, was nothing more than a puppet in his father's corporate empire. She had always admired his ambition, but now she saw the strings that had been pulling him all along. "Your father, he's involved in illegal activities?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonathan nodded slowly. "Yes, and now he's got people in this company who are trying to push me out, people who want to take control, and they're using my own decisions against me. They set you up, Sarah. I didn't fire you because I thought you deserved it. I fired you because they made me." Sarah's mind was racing. The web of lies and manipulation she had been unraveling suddenly made sense. Jonathan's firing of her was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, but there was still one thing she didn't understand. Why had he fired her, of all people? "Why me, Jonathan?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "Why did they go after me?" Jonathan looked away, his gaze distant. "Because of what you don't know. They thought you were too close to the truth. You were investigating things you weren't supposed to. They knew you were getting too close to the real reason why this company has been failing. If you kept digging, you would have uncovered everything." It was then that Sarah understood. Her dedication to her work, her focus on finding solutions to the company's problems, had made her a target. Her integrity had led her to uncover the very corruption Jonathan was now trying to escape. Suddenly, the door to Jonathan's office slammed open, and a group of men in suits walked in, their faces cold and calculated. One of them, a tall man with a sharp jawline, stepped forward. "Jonathan," he said, his voice authoritative, "we need to talk." Jonathan stiffened. "I told you, I'm not signing anything." "Not until I understand what's going on." The man smirked. "You don't have a choice. Your father made sure of that." Sarah's heart sank. The situation was escalating fast. These men were the ones pulling the strings, the ones Jonathan had been trying to fight off. And now they were here, cornering him. "Who are they?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They're the ones who've been manipulating everything," Jonathan said, his voice filled with desperation. "They want to take control of Carter Industries, and they've been using me as a pawn. But it's too late now. They know everything." Sarah's eyes flicked to the group of men, realizing the gravity of the situation. Jonathan's life was falling apart right before her eyes, and she was caught in the middle of it. Just then, one of the men, who had been standing silently in the back of the group, stepped forward. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Sarah, and something about his demeanor sent a chill down her spine. "Jonathan, I think it's time we let her go," he said, his voice smooth but menacing. "We've already dealt with the problem. Now it's time to clean up the mess." Jonathan looked at Sarah, a look of regret crossing his face. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen." But before he could say another word, the man turned towards Sarah and gestured for the others to escort her out. In that moment, Sarah realized that the game had changed. This wasn't just about corporate politics anymore. It was about survival. She had to act fast. There was no way she was going to let these men, these powerful figures, take control of everything. With a surge of determination, Sarah made a split-second decision. She reached for the tablet on Jonathan's desk, where he kept confidential documents about the company's financials, and swiped through it quickly. In a blur of motion, she accessed the files she had been trying to investigate for days, files that could expose everything about the corruption and manipulation happening behind closed doors. "Stop her!" one of the men shouted. But it was too late. Sarah had already saved the documents to her personal drive, her heart pounding as the adrenaline rushed through her veins. The truth was now in her hands. As she turned to leave, Jonathan's voice stopped her. "Sarah, please be careful." She paused for a moment, looking back at him. For the first time in this entire ordeal, she saw the man behind the CEO. He was broken, desperate, and perhaps, for the first time, truly human. "I will," Sarah said, her voice steady and full of resolve. "But you need to decide what kind of man you want to be, Jonathan. You've been playing their game, but now you need to play your own." And with that, she walked out of his office, the future uncertain, but the power of the truth in her hands. The days following Sarah's departure from Jonathan's office were a blur of frenetic activity and sleepless nights. With the evidence she had gathered, she knew she held the power to not only expose the corruption within Carter Industries, but also to change the course of her life, and possibly Jonathan's. The files she had saved contained everything: financial records, illegal transactions, and, most importantly, emails and communications that linked Jonathan's father, Peter Carter, to the criminal activities that had been keeping the company afloat. Sarah had always believed that doing the right thing would lead to a sense of peace and closure. But now, as she stared at the data in front of her, she felt a gnawing emptiness. This wasn't just about righting the wrongs done to her. It was about bringing down a powerful dynasty and upending everything Jonathan had worked for. She had hoped to take a step towards something better, something honest, but she was realizing that doing the right thing sometimes came with a heavy price. But she couldn't go back now. The world needed to know the truth. The following week, Sarah took her findings to the authorities. She had made sure everything was airtight. There was no way anyone could dispute the evidence. She contacted a trusted journalist from a well-known news outlet and offered to share everything in exchange for anonymity. It didn't take long before the news broke. Carter Industries, one of the most powerful companies in the country, had been involved in widespread corruption, embezzlement, and illegal activities tied to powerful political figures, including Peter Carter. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Protests erupted, and the government promised a thorough investigation. Peter Carter, the man who had built the company from the ground up, was implicated in numerous scandals that no one had ever suspected. Investors pulled out, and stock prices plummeted. The media portrayed him as a ruthless businessman who had spent decades hiding his true nature behind a facade of success and prosperity. But it wasn't just Peter who paid the price. Jonathan, too, found himself caught in the crossfire. Despite his attempts to distance himself from his father's dealings, the public wasn't willing to let him off the hook. His reputation, once admired for his business acumen, was now tainted with suspicion. His position as CEO was under immediate review, and many of the executives who had once supported him began to distance themselves, fearing the fallout. Jonathan had hoped that by confessing to Sarah and showing his vulnerability, he could somehow redeem himself. But it was too late. The damage had been done. He had been complicit, whether by ignorance or by choice. He had allowed the corruption to flourish, and now he had to pay the price. Sarah's phone buzzed late one night. It was a message from Jonathan. She hesitated before reading it, unsure of what he could possibly say now. Their last conversation had been a turning point, and though they both knew the truth, they hadn't spoken since. "I never thought I'd be in this position. The things I've done, I can't take them back. I know you're probably angry at me, but I want you to know that I'm trying to fix things. I can't undo the past, but I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Thank you for giving me the chance to see the truth." Sarah sat still, reading the message over and over. She had spent so long chasing justice, uncovering the lies, and feeling betrayed by Jonathan. But in this moment, she saw something different in his words, a sincerity she hadn't expected. She responded, "I hope you're serious, Jonathan. The road to redemption isn't easy, but you can still make a difference." It was the first time in weeks that Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. She knew Jonathan had a long way to go to rebuild his life in the company he had inherited, but it wasn't too late for him. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn from his mistakes and become the man he had always claimed to be, a self-made success. But it was going to take time, effort, and above all, accountability. Months passed, and the fallout from the scandal slowly began to settle. The investigations into Carter Industries were thorough, and multiple executives were held accountable for their roles in the illegal activities. Peter Carter was arrested and charged with numerous crimes, his empire crumbling around him. But the real story wasn't just about the fall of a corporate giant. It was about the people who had the courage to stand up and challenge the system. Sarah's life, too, began to change. Her decision to expose the truth had altered her career trajectory in ways she hadn't anticipated. After the story broke, she became a symbol of integrity and courage in the business world. Her name was known across the media, and people reached out to her for advice, asking how to navigate the often murky waters of corporate corruption. Sarah found herself becoming a voice for whistleblowers, helping others who had been silenced by their employers, and offering guidance to those who were caught between their morals and their jobs. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she doubted herself, moments when she questioned if it was all worth it. The loneliness that came with being thrust into the spotlight weighed heavily on her. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the faces of the people she had helped. People whose stories were just beginning to be told. People who had never had a voice. Through her advocacy, Sarah found healing. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She had done what she set out to do: expose the truth. She had taken the dark secrets of Carter Industries and turned them into a beacon of light for others who had suffered in silence. Her own journey wasn't about vindication anymore. It was about using her experience to ensure that others didn't have to endure the same struggles. As for Jonathan, he spent the next few months trying to rebuild his reputation. He was ousted as CEO of Carter Industries, and while he tried to keep the company afloat, the public had lost trust in him. His father's legacy was shattered, and Jonathan knew that there was no easy way to mend the damage done. But he didn't give up. He decided to start from scratch. Jonathan had the knowledge, the skills, and the drive to make something of himself without relying on his father's wealth or connections. Slowly but surely, he began working on a new venture, one that focused on transparency, ethical business practices, and accountability. He wanted to create a company that was built on trust, not manipulation. The road was long and difficult. There were setbacks, and many of the people who once supported him chose not to follow him in this new direction. But Jonathan didn't let that stop him. He knew that true success didn't come from the power you inherited. It came from the choices you made and the impact you had on others. In the end, the story of Sarah and Jonathan was a reminder that actions have consequences. It wasn't just about making the right decisions in the moment. It was about taking responsibility for those decisions, no matter how hard they were. And sometimes doing the right thing meant sacrificing your own comfort, facing the truth even when it was inconvenient or painful. But it also meant finding redemption, not in the eyes of others, but in your own heart. For Sarah, the story was a testament to the power of integrity and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. It was about taking the power back from those who sought to manipulate, deceive, and control. And for Jonathan, it was a lesson in humility, a reminder that the road to redemption is long, but it's never too late to change. And perhaps in the end, the greatest lesson of all was this: the truth always comes to light, whether you choose to reveal it or not. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this emotional story, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring story. Don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts about the story.